Why British soldiers hated their own generals. When World War I began in 1914, thousands of young British men volunteered with excitement and patriotism. They believed they were fighting for honor, for king and country, and that the war would be short. Instead, they found themselves trapped in muddy trenches, surrounded by death, disease, and despair. As the war dragged on, frustration grew, and many British soldiers began to blame one group above all others, their own generals. But why? Were British generals truly incompetent, or was the reality more complex? Let's look deeper. 1. The lions led by donkeys perception. One of the most famous phrases associated with World War I is, lions led by donkeys. The lions were the brave soldiers. The donkeys were the generals, seen as foolish, outdated, and disconnected. Many frontline soldiers believed their commanders, ordered pointless attacks, underestimated enemy defenses, wasted lives for minimal gains. Whether fair or not, this perception became powerful, and perception in war matters. 2. The horror of trench warfare. British soldiers endured unimaginable conditions, constant artillery bombardment, rats and disease, mud-filled trenches, corpses buried in walls, gas attacks. For weeks or months, soldiers would live under threat of sudden death. When orders came to go over the top, climbing out of trenches into open gunfire, many knew survival was unlikely. And when thousands died within hours, it was easy to blame the men who gave the orders. 3. The Battle of the Somme, 1916. Nothing fueled anger more than the first day of the Battle of the Somme. On July 1, 1916, nearly 60,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded in a single day. It remains one of the bloodiest days in British military history. Many soldiers believed artillery bombardment had failed. Enemy defenses were intact. The attack was poorly planned. To those in the trenches, it felt like they had been sent to die. 4. The distance between frontline and command. British generals were often stationed miles behind the front lines. They worked in headquarters buildings, safer zones, map rooms far from direct gunfire. Meanwhile, ordinary soldiers lived under daily shelling. This physical separation created emotional distance. Soldiers felt their commanders didn't understand trench conditions, didn't see the suffering, didn't grasp the human cost. Whether accurate or not, resentment grew. 5. Outdated tactics versus modern weapons. World War I introduced devastating new technology, machine guns, rapid artillery, barbed wire, poison gas. But early in the war, many generals still relied on mass infantry assaults, rigid battle formations, 19th century strategies. These tactics clashed brutally with modern firepower. When waves of soldiers were cut down in minutes, faith in leadership weakened. 6. The reality. Was it all incompetence? Here's the important question. Were British generals truly foolish? The answer is more complicated. Generals like Sir Douglas Haig believed sustained pressure would wear down Germany. Attrition was necessary. Victory required sacrifice. They were fighting a war unlike any before it. No one had experience with industrial-scale trench warfare. Mistakes were made, yes, but they were learning in real time. War had evolved faster than military doctrine. 7. Gradual tactical improvement. Over time, British strategy improved. Better artillery coordination, creeping barrages, improved communication, tank development. By 1918, British forces were more effective and flexible. The final Allied offensives showed significant tactical growth. This suggests the generals were not static. They adapted, even if slowly. 8. Psychological strain on soldiers. Continuous trauma affected perception. Shell shock, exhaustion, and grief amplified anger. When friends died beside them, soldiers needed someone to blame. Generals became the symbol of distant authority. In war, emotional truth can overpower strategic truth. 9. The aftermath and public memory. After the war, memoirs and literature reinforced the image of incompetent generals. Poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon described the horror and futility of trench warfare. Their powerful words shaped public opinion. The narrative of useless generals became part of British cultural memory, but historians today debate this view. Many argue that victory in 1918 required difficult, painful decisions, and that leadership, while flawed, was not purely incompetent. By 1917 to 1918, resentment toward British generals was no longer just about one battle. It had become a systemic frustration among soldiers on the Western Front. Here's why. 10. The endless cycle of over-the-top orders. Going over the top was a phrase no soldier wanted to hear. Soldiers had to leave the relative safety of the trench, cross open ground filled with mud, barbed wire, and enemy fire, advance under machine guns and artillery. To the men in the trenches, this looked like stubbornness or indifference. 11. Poor communication between ranks. Communication was a massive challenge. Field telephones often cut by artillery, runners shot while delivering messages, maps outdated or misunderstood. Frontline soldiers often didn't know why they were attacking. This lack of clarity increased frustration. They felt expendable, while generals appeared safe and detached. 12. Class tensions and social divide. Most generals came from upper-class backgrounds. Most soldiers were working-class volunteers or conscripts. This created social tension. Soldiers felt their lives were being sacrificed for ambitions they couldn't relate to. Officers made decisions based on traditional military education, not lived experience. The divide between officer and soldier widened the emotional gap. 13. The role of propaganda and morale. The British government and army tried to maintain morale. Posters encouraged bravery. Letters home were censored. Propaganda glorified attacks. But soldiers knew the real danger and futility of orders. When reality clashed with official messages, distrust of leadership grew stronger. 14. Mutinies and friction. While less common than in other armies, some mutinies and refusals to follow orders occurred. Soldiers protested futile attacks. Frustration boiled over in small riots behind the front lines. Even small acts of defiance showed the emotional depth of anger toward generals. 15. Learning curve and tactical evolution. It's important to note, not all generals were incompetent. Over time, British strategy improved. Tank warfare was introduced. Artillery barrages became more coordinated. These changes came after huge losses, which soldiers could not forgive. Even effective strategy couldn't erase the resentment from repeated disasters. 16. Letters and memoirs, shaping public opinion. After the war, soldiers wrote letters and memoirs exposing frustration. We were cannon fodder. Our leaders didn't care. They sat safe while we died. Poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon amplified this message, influencing public perception. The legend of useless generals was born, even if history now debates it. 17. Final reflection, human cost versus military necessity. Soldiers hated their generals because war demanded sacrifices that seemed pointless. But leadership in World War I was navigating unprecedented industrial warfare. Millions of soldiers, modern weapons, logistics nightmares, political pressure. Generals made tough decisions, often brutal, to achieve long-term objectives. Yet from the trenches, those decisions felt like betrayal. 18. The Battle of the Somme, the ultimate anger trigger. On July 1, 1916, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties in a single day, one of the deadliest in history. Reasons soldiers blame generals. Artillery bombardments failed to destroy German defenses. Soldiers were ordered to advance across open ground. Leadership underestimated the danger of machine gun fire. From the trenches, soldiers felt the generals were recklessly sacrificing men for minimal gains. Visual idea: zoomed-in soldier faces, smoke, craters, mud, and wave after wave of infantry advancing. Narration hook: thousands fell before even reaching the enemy, and yet the orders kept coming. 19. Passchendaele: mud, water, and futility. The Third Battle of Ypres, 1917, also called Passchendaele, highlighted trench horror and poor planning. Endless rain turned trenches into mud rivers. Soldiers sank into water and sludge while under fire. Casualties mounted in unimaginable numbers. Frontline soldiers saw generals far away in dry headquarters, issuing orders that seemed blind to the suffering below. The mud and misery became a symbol of leadership failure. 20. Mutinies and refusals. Anger wasn't always verbal. Sometimes it turned into rebellion. Some soldiers refused dangerous orders. Small units protested or delayed attacks. These incidents were rare but significant. It showed how deep the mistrust ran, even in disciplined armies. 21. Letters, diaries, and the soldier's perspective. Private diaries and letters reveal raw emotion. We are being thrown away like toys. They do not know what it means to live in this mud. Our lives mean nothing to the men giving orders. These personal accounts shaped the historical narrative and reinforced resentment toward generals. 22. Psychological factors. Constant bombardment, death of comrades, and disease caused shell shock and despair. Soldiers were emotionally and mentally exhausted. Any decision by generals that caused repeated losses was interpreted as cruelty or incompetence. Even effective long-term strategies were invisible to men living hour by hour in the trenches. 23. The final offensive and changing tides. By 1918, British generals had learned from earlier mistakes. Coordinated artillery and infantry attacks, tank deployment, improved communication lines. Despite these improvements, many soldiers still carried resentment for past losses, showing that perception often outweighs reality. 25. Memoirs and soldier accounts. After the war, soldiers began writing memoirs and letters that expressed raw frustration. We were cannon fodder. They sent us to die for nothing. Our generals didn't know what it meant to be in the mud. These accounts became primary sources for later historians and shaped public perception of British generals. Visual idea for video. Old sepia letters over trench images, close-up on handwriting, slow pan effect. 26. Poets and cultural memory. Poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon immortalized soldiers' suffering in verse. Owen's poems highlighted futility and loss. Sassoon criticized leadership and blind obedience. Through poetry and memoirs, the image of incompetent or detached generals became part of British cultural memory. 27. Historians' perspective. Modern historians offer a more nuanced view. British generals faced unprecedented industrial warfare. Decisions that seemed callous were often tactical necessities. They learned and adapted. The later war victories reflect strategic evolution. This shows the divide. Soldiers experienced immediate horror, while generals calculated long-term outcomes. 28. Emotional legacy. For soldiers, the war left deep scars: loss of friends and comrades, mental trauma, resentment toward leadership. Even victories felt bitter because soldiers had paid the highest price. Video visuals idea. Slow pan over war cemeteries, empty trenches, and faded photos of soldiers to evoke emotion. 29. Leadership lessons. The story teaches lessons about leadership in extreme conditions. Communication is crucial. Empathy matters. Tactical success can't erase human cost. Even today, military scholars study WW1 to balance strategy with human factors. 31. Post-war trauma and soldier hatred. After returning home, many soldiers struggled with shell shock, what we now call PTSD, loss of friends and comrades, psychological trauma from constant bombardment. Letters and memoirs reveal a deep sense of betrayal. We were thrown into battle without proper care or concern. Our generals watched from safety while we bled in the mud. Even when battles were ultimately successful, soldiers remembered the pain, confusion, and loss, not the victory. 32. Memoirs and diaries, shaping public opinion. Private accounts became public after the war. Soldiers' memoirs, letters, and diaries described futile attacks, poor leadership, endless suffering. These accounts contributed to a powerful cultural image, the heroic soldier betrayed by his command. Poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon wrote vividly about the futility of war and the incompetence of leadership. Their work made this narrative widely known, influencing public opinion for decades. 33. Historians' nuanced perspective. Modern historians, however, argue that while soldiers' anger was understandable, generals were often facing unprecedented challenges. Industrialized warfare, massive armies, new deadly technology, machine guns, artillery, gas, logistics nightmares. Many generals learned over time, adapting strategies that ultimately helped the Allies win. This shows a contrast between immediate emotional reality for soldiers and long-term strategic necessity. 34. Lessons about leadership. The hatred toward generals highlights important leadership lessons. Communication matters. Soldiers need to understand orders and objectives. Empathy is critical. Leaders must acknowledge human cost. Adaptation is vital. Tactics must evolve with technology. Even in extreme circumstances, poor perception of leadership can destroy morale, no matter how competent the strategy may be. 35. Closing reflection. The story of British soldiers and their generals is one of courage, sacrifice, and human complexity. Soldiers hated generals for understandable reasons: the constant danger, loss of life, and perceived detachment. Generals operated under unprecedented circumstances, often forced to make brutal decisions to win the war. Ultimately, this tension between the front line and command underscores the human cost of industrialized warfare. In the mud of the Western Front, men fought not just the enemy, they fought the very leadership that sent them there. Their anger, their resentment, and their courage live on in history. British soldiers hated their generals because war demanded impossible sacrifices, harsh orders, repeated failed assaults, physical and emotional distance from command. Yet history shows that generals were learning, adapting, and trying to navigate unprecedented warfare. For video narration hook. In the mud of the Western Front, men fought not just the enemy, they fought the very leadership that sent them there. Their anger, their resentment, and their courage live on in history.